Alright, so I'm here with my Yamaha Warrior. When I changed the oil in it, in the oil filter, a couple months ago, I noticed that there were some flakes of metal in the oil, and I looked it up, and on a forum it was like, oh yeah, it's pretty common for these quads to have that. People say, oh yeah, I went to the dealer. They said it's basically fine as long as there's no chunks, and I didn't see any chunks at the time. But on these quads, it's really easy to just check the filter because if you just take this cover off, only a little bit of oil comes out, and you don't really have to drain the whole thing. So I thought I might as well check it. I did that, and there were chunks of metal in there. So that's not good. I'll show you what came out of it. I also drained the oil and then ran it through a strainer, and I found more of these chunks. But yeah, so that's it's not good because now that means I have to pull the engine out of this thing, and we're going to see what is shredding inside of it. So for that, I already drained the oil. For something like this, if I'm going to pull the engine and basically rebuild it, I'm gonna split the case. I made sure I drained the oil a couple days ago. Left the drain plug out to make sure all the oil inside of it just gets out of there, because that makes it a lot easier once you open it up. Everything is just a lot less oily. And then what we're also gonna do is just take off all these plastics, the seat, everything, so that, and the foot guards here, everything, so that we can pull the engine out. So yeah, I'm just gonna get started on that now. All right, so I got the plastics all removed. Now we're gonna go ahead and remove the foot pedals and the footrests. And then we're gonna do the muffler and carburetor. So in order to do that, we're just gonna take all the bolts out, remove the shifter linkage, and on the other side, remove all the brake assembly. And then yeah, we'll take the bolts out of the carburetor, and then we should be good to go. Alright, so I got rid of all the foot guards, and I took the air box out too, just to make everything a little easier to get to. And then I also took out the carburetor. So now we're going to go ahead and remove the shift linkage for the forward reverse selector, and then as well as remove the muffler and the clutch cables. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so I have everything removed from this engine, except for the chain and sprocket here. I don't have a socket big enough to fit this nut here, so I have to go tomorrow and get one. But other than that, everything is taken off. I took off the muffler, I took off the all the wiring, including the positive lead for the starter. Like I said, all the cables are disconnected. This side, took off the throttle, all the linkages, like the forward reverse selector linkage, the clutch cable, spark plug, everything is taken off. So now all we have to do is, like I said, get the chain off, and then we can really just unbolt the engine and pull it right out. Alright, so I got the engine removed from the quad, so now I'm going to take it downstairs and start tearing it apart. Alright, so I forgot to record it, but I took the front cover off here, and then took off the bolt for the clutch, and then took the basket and the clutch pads out. You can see that right there. So then the next step is I still have some oil in there, so I have to let that drain into something, and then we'll come over here and remove this cover here, and then we'll remove the flywheel with a flywheel puller here. You have to buy this special flywheel puller. I just got this off Amazon. I think it was like 25, 30 bucks. Yeah, I bought it off Amazon. It's like 25, 30 bucks. Just thread that on there, and then use an impact, and this this piece just drives in, and then the flywheel pops off, and then we'll go from there. Alright, so I'm actually going to take the whole head assembly off first before I do the flywheel. But I did take this cover off, the first cover off. Anyway, I took off the cover for this and then took off that sprocket for the camshaft here. And then I attached a string to make sure that this chain doesn't fall inside the engine. I also removed, you have to remove the tensioner to get the chain loose enough to pull that sprocket out. I talked about that in another video. But next we're just going to take off the head bolts all along there and then pull the head off, or the first half of the head off, and then we take out this bolt and take the rest of it off. So yeah. Alright, so I got the cylinder and the piston removed, the top and the bottom part of the cylinder. I'm not going to do anything with the top end. I already changed the valve guides and checked everything, and everything seemed good. And so when I took the piston out, you can see it here. The compression rings, I staggered them now, but when I took it off, the gaps, the ring gaps, they weren't staggered. So that could have been part of my oil burning problem. But later I'll check the ring gaps and everything and make sure they're not worn. I'll probably just go ahead and replace them anyway. But now what we're going to do, the next step is to remove this big cover here and that bolt, then pull off the flywheel and everything and this starter. So yeah. Alright, so I got everything for the flywheel taken off. I got that cover, the charging coils and everything. Then I just have this back part of it, and in order to get that off, you have to have this flywheel puller I showed you guys before. That's the size you need. And then in order to get that off, you're going to need an air impact, because these little electric ones they just don't have enough torque. So I'm just going to hold this big socket part with the crescent wrench, and then just use the impact to drive that bolt in, and it should come right off. So yeah. Alright, so that was actually surprisingly easy. It literally just a couple ugga-duggas with the impact, and then it popped right off. So that was easy. Now we're going to go ahead and remove this starter. So in order to do that, I'm just going to pop these two bolts out, and it should pull right off. So yeah. Alright, so I got that starter off. That was easy to take out. So now I'm going to pop off these crimp washers on the drive and balance gear. We're going to take the nut off of these, and then we'll slide all the gears off of those. And once we do that, we'll take the oil pump gear off and disassemble the oil pump. Alright, so I pulled both of those gears off here. You can see them right here. The way I had to do that is you get a clean rag. So I got this thing, and you shove it in between the two gears, and then you take an impact or something. You could probably use a breaker bar, and you just take them off like that. But the rag will hold the two gears so that you don't have trouble with them spinning. But now what we're going to do is remove these screws and take off the oil pump and take it apart. Some of these, especially this one, look a little stripped, so I might have to use an impact screwdriver to get those off, but yeah, we'll see if they come off. Alright, so I got that off. Screws were pretty stripped, especially like this one. So what I did was I used an impact screwdriver. That worked pretty well, actually. I'd never really used one like that before, but it worked pretty well. I think I got it for on sale for like $7 at Harbor Freight, and it worked great, so that's good. But now what we're going to do is remove this tube here. So just take out those two bolts, and it should come right off. Alright, so I removed that pipe. That came right off. But now what we're going to do is remove this shift, this whole linkage here, and then we're going to take out this, there's a ball and spring under this nut here, so we're going to take that out. And then once we're done with that, we're going to remove this chain tensioner guard thing, and then we're going to remove all the bolts that hold these two halves in place. There's two more in there, and then we're going to split the case. So yeah. Alright, so I got the case split. In the manual, the service manual, and online, it looked like everyone had a really hard time getting the case split, and you like basically kind of needed a case splitter. But this came apart relatively easy. I kind of just took a screwdriver and hammered on this piece here. Actually, it was on this one. But I mean, you don't want to stick a screwdriver inside where it seals, otherwise it won't seal ever again. But I did that on like anything that stuck out. I basically did that, and I just went around once, and then I pulled up on the top, and it popped right off. So that was easy. But now we're gonna start pulling all these gears out and inspecting them for wear. So yeah, I'll let you guys know what I find. All right, so I didn't really find anything that was shredding. Again, this is all the stuff that came out of it. This right here, I mean, you look at this and you're like, oh, that's from one of the bearings, but it's not. I inspected every bearing in this thing inside of this case, and it just, all the rollers are there. So I don't know where that came from. This thing, these are just magnets I was using to see what was metal and what wasn't. This thing, I'm not sure where it came from. Originally, I thought that it was probably from the casting. It broke off from one of these, and that's where one of the rods went into, but it's not one of those. I inspected both sides of the case, and I can't find where it goes. The only thing I can find, and that I think it might have been, was one of these guides that's in the cylinder head, and it's a broken one of those. It fits exactly, perfectly in there. All the ones that I have now in here aren't broken, so the only thing I can think of is that this one of these broke in the past and fell down in there, and someone replaced it. So I'm not too concerned about that. All the shift forks are straight. They don't have much wear on them. All the bearings, I rotated the inner races. All these feel super smooth, but I am going to go ahead and change them out anyway. As far as I can tell, they are the original bearings inside of there. They're the OEM brand, so those should be fine. This connecting rod here is aftermarket. It's a hot rods cam, not a Yamaha one. Or not, sorry, not a cam, a connecting rod. It's a hot rods connecting rod, not a stock one. And these main bearings, the main crank bearings, those are also aftermarket. They're not original. So I did buy new crank bearings as well, although I probably didn't need to replace them. But yeah, so I know someone was in here before because of the connecting rod, and also the gasket that was on there was just red RTV gasket maker, and apparently you're not supposed to use that. You're supposed to use case sealant, whether it be an off-brand or a Yamaha branded case sealant. I went ahead and bought the OEM Yamaha case sealant, so that's good. But yeah, so I mean, everything else on this was fine except for the oil pump had a lot of scoring. That was pretty worn, so some of the flakes could have been coming from that. You could see there's a pretty deep groove down in there, and that's not supposed to be there. So I bought a new one of those. This is it, the inside of the pump. That also had a bunch of wear. So I bought a new one of those. Other thing I bought was new oil drain plug. This one is the OEM one. It's all stripped out because that socket, or the hex there, is super shallow. So I bought an aftermarket one off eBay, and I like this one a lot better because, one, it has these little studs that kind of come out of there, and it's a real pain with this one because there's a spring you have to push up in there and then twist it on, and I had a really hard time with that. But that should be a lot easier with these, so I'll be able to actually get on there and twist it. Plus this hex is a lot deeper, so that shouldn't strip out as easily. And then I said I wasn't going to do anything with the head because I already went inside and did the valve guides. But when I did that, I didn't lap the valves because it didn't really look like there was a lot of carbon on it. But since I have it all out and I'm waiting on a few other parts, I am going to go ahead and lap them. So in order to do that, we're going to take off both these covers here, remove the valves, and then just go ahead and lap them. Alright, so I just did the intake. Just like before, I'm going to use this homemade tool out of PVC pipe and a clamp. Put the clamp on the bottom of the valve. Make sure that's all lined up. Tighten it down Once you get it tight enough, remove these little retainers here, and then just loosen up the clamp, pull the valve out. Alright, so I got both of the valves out. In order to lap the valves, I have this suction cup thing here, and what you do is you suction cup the bottom of the valve, apply the valve lapping compound. I have coarse or fine and coarse. You start with the fine, then work your way up to the coarse. You apply it along where the valve seats, right there. There is some carbon deposits on there. So you apply it where the valve seats, and then you just put it back in. You reinsert the valve, and then you spin it with the valve lapping compound on it. But in order to get it to suction cup, you need this to be clean. And since I have a bunch of carbon deposits on here, I have it on both valves. I'm going to clean them up with a brass wire brush, making sure not to really touch the area where it seats here. Any carbon deposits on the stem here doesn't really matter, unless it's really where it contacts the bushing there, or the guide and the guide seal. That'll wear that out pretty quick. But I don't have that, so all I'm going to do is just remove all the carbon deposits on the face of the valve. Alright, so I lapped both of the valves. Before I did that, I went ahead and used a brass wire wheel to clean up most of this carbon deposit. I didn't go crazy, as you can see. There's still a little bit on there, but the majority of it's gone, so that's good. And then after that, I went ahead and lapped the valves. I said before you start with the fine valve lapping compound, but you actually want to start with the coarse and then go to fine. And then, as you can see, the seats on these valves are super clean. The exhaust port did have a bit more carbon deposits on it, but now both of them are super clean, so that should help out with my compression. But now I'm just going to go ahead and start putting this head all back together. Alright, so I got this cylinder head all back together. Everything went smoothly. It was a little easier to put the those retaining clips back on now that I had done it once before already, but everything is all back together. The valves are in, so that's ready to go back on. That's all set. But now what I'm going to do is go ahead and try and change all these transmission bearings. I have them. They're in the freezer right now to try and shrink them up a little bit. Alright, so I have all the bearings removed from the case. You can see right now they're just placed in there, so I know where they go. But anyway, I took them all out, except for one of them, which I couldn't get out. But the way I had to get them out was the way they tell you in the service manual, where you just put the case in the oven and set it to like 240 degrees, and then they literally, you just turn the case upside down and they all fall out. But that one I couldn't get out. I tried like banging on the other side while it was hot. I heated it and let it cool like 5 or 6 times, and I just can't get it out. That one right there. But anyway, after I did that, I just washed the inside out with diesel fuel, so that there was no other metal particles or not much oil left. So these are all clean. But yeah, so what I'm going to go ahead and do now is I have the new bearings in the freezer. So I'm going to take these ones back out. Then I'm going to heat with a heat gun. I could put this up in the oven, but I don't want it to cool down too quick. So I'm going to heat with a heat gun each of these circles here, and then take the bearing once it's hot. Take the cold bearing and put it into this hot case here, and that should go right in. And then I also have 2 of these brand new seals which go under this bearing. There's the old one right there, and then this bearing. So there's the old one right there too. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so I got all the new bearings in. They all went pretty easily. I also put my new crank bearing in here, but I didn't take this one off because it looks like you have to take this whole crankshaft apart in order to get to this one, and it's really not really an easy thing to do. And I don't really want to mess with it since this bearing is still pretty tight, and it's not the original brand. It's a good brand, but it's not the original one, so that means it's probably not the original one that was in this quad. It was replaced somewhere along the line, so I should be fine with that. I got one new one in. And then I said before that this seal, this is the old one. These are both the old ones, but this seal went under this bearing. but this seal actually goes under this bearing, and then this seal goes under this bearing. But I got everything in. Everything went in pretty smooth. I had no issues with that. But now what we're going to go ahead and do is inspect all of these parts one more time. Like I said before, I mean, I inspected every single tooth of every gear. Like if there was an issue, I would have seen it. But I'm going to go ahead and inspect them one more time because, I mean, not a lot of people will go through the trouble to split the case anyway. And if there is something wrong, I do want to make sure that I catch it. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just look everything over one last time. Make sure there's no visible dust or anything that I left in here. Then start reassembling everything. And while I do that, I'll put this assembly lube I have here on everything that moves, basically. I'll put it in all the bearings because a lot of them don't have oil in them right now. All these little holes, all the these rods here that the shift forks slide on, everything that I can, I'll put that assembly lube on. You don't have to use assembly lube, you could just use oil, but I have this assembly lube, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so I installed everything in the transmission. All the gears are in and everything. I shifted through it with the shift selector here, or the shift star here. And every gear works fine. Then I also put this other half of the case on without any gasket or anything on the mating surface and without bolting it in. And all the gears shifted through smoothly and with no effort. So now we're ready to put the gasket maker on. So we're going to use the Yamabond stuff. But before we do that, we're going to use some degreaser and degrease and clean this mating surface here so that the gasket maker can stick well. And then after we do that, we're going to put the gasket on and then put this case on. Then hand tighten all the bolts. And then after 1 hour, we're going to come back and torque everything down. Alright, so I got the case all back together. I let it sit for about like 10 minutes because it didn't say anything in the service manual or on the bottle there that you had to let it sit for an hour. So I put all the bolts in, hand tightened everything, and then torqued everything to spec according to the Yamaha's pattern as well as torque specification, which I think it was 7.2 foot-pounds for all these case bolts. So that's all back together. The gasket maker's drying there, but that should seal pretty well. Alright, so I got this engine block pretty much all back together. You guys already saw that, I'm pretty sure. And then I also went ahead and put the clutch assembly all back together, put those gears in. I didn't really record it because it's basically the opposite of putting it, taking it all apart. But anyway, we have a new gasket here, new gasket in the oil pump. I made sure to oil everything with assembly lube, especially the oil pump, because you don't want that getting scored up like our old one here. And then, so that's all back together. Now we're just waiting on the top end, and then I also have to put this flywheel assembly all back together. But anyway, so our old cylinder is right here. I looked closer into it, and there are some pretty deep grooves in there. So I would have to get that bored out. I even honed it too, but they didn't come out with a hone. So those are pretty deep. And then our piston also had a lot of scoring. So you can see all those deep grooves in there. So we don't want to reuse that. So what I did was I went on eBay because I didn't want to buy a new cylinder. I could have gotten it bored out, but I didn't. I wound up not doing that. But anyway, I went on eBay and I ordered this cylinder here along with the piston I got it for 85 bucks. And the guy said it was a stock bore, came off a running quad, blah, 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 all that. But he said that the cylinder was in really good shape. There's no deep grooves. And as you can see, there aren't. Those grooves right there, they're not deep. You can't feel them with your finger. It just looks like that on camera. And the piston's also in really good shape. I tested with these tools here. I forget what you call them, but I tested the diameter of it. It was exactly 83 millimeters, which is what we want because the clearance that Yamaha gives is 82.97 millimeters to 83.02 millimeters. So this is right in spec, which is good. I did the skirt too on here. Skirt is pretty clean, both sides. And I tested that, and that's also within spec. The rings it came with, the ring gap was a little bit too big, which is fine because I ordered new piston rings anyway. They're on their way. So yeah, so I should be able to get this thing all back together. We just have to put a new O-ring on here. I ordered a new O-ring for in here. That looks like it was replaced at one point, but I ordered a new one for that. Yeah, and then I just gotta put it all back together. Alright, so I got my new parts in. We got brand new piston rings. We got to put on this piston. And then all new top end seals. I didn't want to use the seals that I have in my gasket kit because seals like this that are really important, like this thing here, I wouldn't want this to go bad because it's such a pain to go and replace it. So I figured I would just buy the OEM Yamaha genuine part for that. But stuff like the seals here, I'm not really worried about them going bad. Like a cheap gasket there should be fine. I'm not really worried about it. And if it does go bad, then so be it. I'll replace it. Kind of taking a risk, but I'm not too worried about that. But anyway, yeah. So I got to get these rings onto this new piston I have. And then what's good about these cylinders is they actually have a kind of like a groove cut into these cylinder walls here. So you don't even have to use like a ring compressor. Like this is a ring compressor. You would put this over the piston with the piston rings on it, tighten it down, and then it would compress the rings, put it over the cylinder, and then hit it in with a the back of a screwdriver or something wooden. And then that would go in. But here, these are really easy because you can kind of just put the piston on here and make sure it's oiled, and then just shove it down in there because it has that recessed area to compress the rings for you. So that's kind of cool. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so as you can see, I got my piston installed onto the crankshaft, or the connecting arm there. I have all the new rings installed. The thing is covered in this assembly lube here. So now what I have to do is install this the cylinder here. I'm going to put a fresh coat of that assembly lube on here right after I clean it one more time. And then I should be able to just hold the piston with one hand and apply moderate pressure. Make sure the gasket's on the end of this, and then apply moderate pressure while I force this down over those rings, and that should go on pretty smoothly. So yeah. Alright, so I got the cylinder on. It went pretty smoothly. I didn't have any issues with that. It's pretty easy. Made sure that the cylinder wall and everything was just coated in that assembly lube. Because that's like the most important part, because if you don't have any oil in there, your brand new rings are gonna wear out real fast. So that should be fine now. But what I'm doing now is I'm installing the starter. I have to put the bolts in. And then I have to install the magneto charging system and everything, along with the oil filter, these chain guides, which I bought new ones. They're over there. These ones were a little worn out, but to install those, the cover for that, and all that onto here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so as you guys can see, I finally got this engine all back together. I've rode it a bunch since then, and the thing runs great. Everything shifts super smooth. I have no leaks out of the center of the case, which I was worried about. But nothing seems to leak. The oil stays where it belongs. It doesn't burn the oil, so that's a lot better. I'm happy with that, especially. It's got plenty of power, so I think the compression is definitely good, without all that, with those worn rings and scored cylinder. So that's definitely a lot better. And then, as you guys could see, I did some other stuff to the quad. I put new tires on it finally. Those old ones you guys saw in the beginning of the video, they were completely shot. So I'm running ITP hole shots on here. They're 1 inch smaller than the old tires I had on here. These are the stock size, is what should come with the quad. The old ones, I feel like they might look a little better, but you know, these make the quad handle handle pretty good. So I'm happy I got the smaller ones. And then in the back, these are an inch bigger, or 2 inches bigger. And this is also the OEM size. So these should make the quad actually slightly faster, because with the bigger tires you kind of change your gear ratio a little bit. And they also grab a lot better than the old worn out ones. And then what I also did was I put new headlight guards on here. That was just a quick, easy install, and now it gives it the iconic Warrior look with those headlight guards. So yeah, I didn't really feel the need to record me putting it all back together, because it was basically the reverse of taking it apart, and plus the video was getting kind of long. So thanks for watching.